Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of Overcoming Depression and Anxiety, brought to you by Healthy Me Summits. I'm Joanna Rushton, your host, and we're being joined here today by one of my very dear friends and mentors, Paul Chek. Paul is a holistic health practitioner and founder of the Chek Institute. He's a prominent expert in the field of holistic health and corrective and high performance exercise. For 32 years, Paul's unique holistic approach to clinical assessment, intervention, treatment, rehabilitation, and education has changed the lives of countless individuals worldwide. By approaching the body-mind as a whole system of systems, Paul has successfully coached clients towards complete resolution of their health and performance challenges, where traditional approaches have consistently failed. It is his mission to help create a world of healthy, happy, functionally successful people. And I'm delighted to introduce you to Paul. I have had the pleasure of studying under Paul for the last 15 years, and he's impacted my life only through positive energy and changes. So, Paul, a very warm welcome to you, my love.
Thank you, dear. It's always a great time when we can get together.
It is, it is. We don't spend enough time together, but when we do, it's always quality.
So
So,
have busy beavers.
we are very busy beavers, and we're going to jump straight into it today. I know that what you have to share for our listeners and also other health practitioners out there, and perhaps even carers of people who are suffering from depression, anxiety, what you're going to share with us, I know is profound. I've experienced your 1, 2, 3, 4 model that you're going to share with us today. And it really is life-changing. So I'm just letting people know right now that they need to get a pen and paper out, and they need to take away any other distractions that they might have going on around them, and they need to really tune in, because what this man has to say could really change your life from this moment on. So, Paul, the first thing I'm going to ask you, my love, is how often do you work with people that are suffering from anxiety and depression?
Pretty much every day. I would say it's one of the most common elements of most case histories that come to see me. You know, I do a lot of work with professional athletes and business executives. Usually people that have a significant amount on the go, often financially quite capable. But I also work with children, even infants and their parents. And there's very, very frequently some degree of anxiety, often because they can't figure out how to get over whatever it is that's ailing them. And there's also quite often depression, because they've been trying often for years on end, particularly in the medical system, and they're not getting better, they're getting worse. So they get to the point where they just don't know what to do. And then there's all the biochemical issues that, are involved. Most people don't come to see me unless they have something going on. And whenever someone's got anxiety or depression, you can pretty much be assured there's a biochemical component to it, which relates to kinds of things we're going to talk about today. But it's a pretty daily occurrence for me. I thought I'd share some statistics just on how common it is. Depression affects 6.7% of the US population annually, so that's a lot of people when you figure out there's, 370 million people or something like that. So 6.7%, if you had that much money, you'd be really wealthy. The World Health Organization predicts that depression will be the second most common disease behind cardiovascular disease in 5 years. So serious problem there. Anxiety affects about 1 in 4 people, so that's 25% of the world population. Anxiety disorders are the largest class of psychiatric disorders, which means that they've got more money-making opportunities on people with anxiety than anybody. So they've got every kind of hook and net you can think about there. If you're even slightly abnormal, then you might fall into one of those categories, which, as I'm sure you're well aware, can be a problem if you get in the hands of the wrong practitioner, because you won't be addressing the real issue. Anxiety and depression, particularly depression, but anxiety and depression are very related to suicide. They're like predecessors to suicide. And suicide's the third leading cause of death in the world for 15 to 24-year-olds, and the second leading cause of death for 24 to 35-year-olds. It's the rates of teenage suicide right now are at the all-time high. And it was interesting, a few years ago, I saw a study that looked at teenage suicide, and the highest levels of teenage suicide was in New Zealand. And I was really shocked when I read that, because New Zealand's, as a country goes, much healthier than most. And second place was Japan. And so what they shared in the article is that it was scholastic standards. New Zealand and Japan have the highest standards in high school. So children are under tremendous scholastic pressure, and they track the high rates of suicide right back to that. So you can see right there is a source of anxiety. And if you can't keep up with everybody else and you think that you're stupid, then you get depressed. So the key point I wanted to make is that, yes, anxiety and depression are both very common. They're both commonly mistreated and misunderstood, and they both are developmental precursors to suicide, and the rates of suicide are going higher and higher and higher to like unbelievable levels.
So, Paul, probably the very first thing that we want to address in that case, given what you've just said, is, there's a lot of research out there suggesting that depression, anxiety is related to genetic disorders. And, one of the first things I want to get clear about is, how big of a factor is that really in your approach to working with clients with depression, anxiety?
Well, there's a couple of issues there. One, yes, there is a lot of research like that. And two, as you know, with the sort of the gene fanaticism going on and the huge potential earnings by the biotech industry, which they're already capitalizing on heavily, the truth of the matter is that there's now genetic connections to every disorder. And, you've got the fat gene, you've got the bad digestion gene, the bad hair gene, the ugly gene, the I don't like exercise gene. And, in other words, anytime they can identify a genetic disorder and create some kind of a test for it, people love it because it gives them an excuse to say, I don't have to fix this because I'm broken. So the whole concept really enhances the Newtonian materialist mindset of the human body as a machine that just has broken parts. And the issue too is that all of us have genetic weaknesses. That's just a fact. All of our parents had their unique weaknesses. There's racial and cultural weaknesses. Like you can look into the genetics, and certain races of people have a predisposition to such and such. So when your parents mix, you got your mom's predispositions and your dad's predispositions. So that what they're not telling you is that we've all got genetic predispositions to all sorts of things. But the example I really like that I've heard epigeneticists use is that genes are like a loaded gun, but it's the environment that pulls the trigger.
I love that.
So, and Bruce Lipton has done extensive work in the area of genetics, but also to show how we're being lied to and manipulated and statistically tricked and all sorts of stuff. And the reality of it is that only about 5% of diseases actually come from frank genetic disorders. The rest of them are really triggered by environmental challenges. In other words, not knowing how to create an environment that is health affirmative or even life affirmative. So yes, there's always a genetic component, but what I say to people all the time who come to me showing me their reports from the medical examiner or the testing companies, oh, I've got such and such. Good. Well, now that you know that, you should even be more motivated to follow my plan. If somebody tells you that you got a weak spot in the sidewall of your tire, well, if it's still holding air, you're going to probably want to drive it to the garage, but you're going to drive carefully and pay real good, close attention. You're not going to drive like an idiot. So if a genetic weakness is like a bulge in the side of a tire, if you know it's there and you still got to drive, i.e. live, then you got to drive intelligently, which means you have to know how to make the important choices about the factors that really matter, which is what we'll talk about.
So taking that view in that case, Paul, taking the view that really our environment, our choices, the way we think, that really is what directs our physiology and our biology. Can you explain more to us in that case how your working system an overview of your working system that you use to help people overcome depression and anxiety?
Yes, my systems, shall we say, it's a universal format that I can apply to any challenge because it deals with the issues that are directly related to survival and health themselves, both psychologically and physically. In other words, you can apply my model to improving athletic performance. You can apply it to getting a woman healthy so she can have a baby, to a disease, to being a better actor, whatever you want, because it looks at these key foundation factors. So my system's broken down by the number. It's a very simple thing to remember: 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 stands for what is the one love or the one dream, goal, or objective that's important enough for you to accomplish that you're willing to better manage yourself and do the things you need to do to enhance the likelihood that you can not only create that, but enjoy the process of it, right? Mm-hmm. Lots of people out there get the job done, but they do it taking pills, falling asleep at the wheel, gaining 40 pounds while they do a project and hoping that they rebound back when they get their 2 weeks off that never comes. So what I find is that a lot of people are so caught in the, shall we say, the humdrum of doing what we've always done and doing what everybody else is doing. For example, you got all the business experts in the world and the Brian Tracys and the Tony Robbinses and the Zig Ziglars telling you if you're not working 60 to 80 hours a week, you'll never be successful. And people really believe that. So they work harder and harder instead of smarter and smarter. And as they work harder and harder, they don't realize that they're taking less and less time to take care of themselves, to sleep, to exercise, to get up out of their chair and breathe. And so when this thing keeps going and going, what we have is people that may have a dream, goal, or objective, but they don't realize that they're not doing it effectively. A good example is I have worked with a lot of martial artists, kickboxers, boxers, professionals, people that make their living doing this. And when oftentimes they have the hardest time with their conditioning. A lot of these guys are great natural fighters, but they're lazy in the gym. So I tell them that, if you don't do the things that you've got to do to manage yourself effectively, you're going to burn yourself out. And the one day that somebody shows up who's more rested than you, if they can weather the storm you can give them, when you can't hold your hands up anymore, they're going to knock you out. And so I tell them, you're being an ineffective warrior. You're not honoring your craft enough by eating garbage that you shouldn't, doing crash weight losses. You are riding on your belief that you're a great fighter, but you're forgetting there's a lot of great fighters out there. So my point is that the fighter that honors the archetype of a warrior knows that rest and nutrition and hydration are as important as training and as important as boxing or fighting itself. So my point for the one love is that if you don't have a dream big enough to respect and to really participate fully in the creation of, which has to include caring for yourself, then you're always going to be shall we say, either a good creator that's always got problems in their life, or someone who has a great mind and has great capability, but doesn't get as much done as they'd like to get done because they're never fully energized, and they're actually running on the hamster wheel everybody else is on. So they just become better hamsters, which means they're highly profitable to the medical system. So once I know what a person's chief dream, goal, or motive is, something that they're willing to go for, I look at what needs to be balanced. So I take a Tai Chi approach, the feminine principle, and then the masculine principle, which I won't go into in great detail here because it'll take too much time. But basically, the feminine principle deals with things that have to do with nutrition and hydration, sleep, cooling, and the masculine principle deals with issues of breathing, thinking, and movement, or spending energy. So the yin principle is all about accumulating energy and giving your body time to regenerate and heal. The Yang principle is all about spending resources and doing the things that we do that put wear and tear on our bodies, which we can't do indefinitely or we'll just wear out. So once I know what your love is, then I use my 4 doctor questionnaires that anybody can get a hold of in my book, The Last 4 Doctor, or excuse me, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. And I get a rating scale. In my professional practice, just like you know, Joe, because I trained you, we use a 29 system questionnaire, which is much more comprehensive. So as a therapist, it's easy to see where a person's out of balance. So step number 2 is looking at where are you out of balance, identifying that and say, okay, if you really want to live this dream, you really want to build this house or have this baby, these are the things that we've got to do well with to bring you back into balance. And lo and behold, once you start making those shifts, anxiety and depression often clear right up. A grand majority of it will clear right up just by giving the body what it needs. Once we identify those imbalances, then 3 is there's only 3 choices we can make, and in relationship to any person, place, or thing, and that's the optimal choice, which is the one that's best for you and everybody involved, the suboptimal, which is instant gratification, and the third is to do nothing, which has 2 components, either to be apathetic about it, which means nobody can help you, and or to gather more information to make an intelligent decision. So what do you love? Where are you out of balance? And what choices are you willing to make to bring yourself back into balance? 4 is the 4 doctors: Dr. Diet, Dr. Quiet, Dr. Happiness, and Dr. Movement. So when we address the dream, we're already really establishing Dr. Happiness's motive. This is what makes me happy: completing this project, becoming, getting this promotion, whatever their dream is. Dr. Happy is the umbrella under which the core values for diet, movement, and rest or regeneration are then built, and those core values are designed to bring the person back into balance, and the core values become their operating system, their guidance system. I often say to my patients, your yes has no value until you learn to say no. So if a person doesn't have a value, for example, if you don't know the difference between organic food and commercial food, then you don't know when to say yes or no. If you don't know that a human body needs 8 hours of sleep at night, then you're going to stay up late and you won't even realize what you're doing to yourself because you don't have a well-established value based on the principles of how the body and the mind work. So, one of the key things I wanted to point out is that when I run questionnaires on people and evaluate things, when you're looking at things like blood pressure, respiration, heart rate, digestive function, eliminative function, hormonal function, central nervous system function, thermoregulation or maintaining body temperature, immune function, limbic emotional function, those are all autonomically regulated systems. What people don't realize is these are actually your key survival systems, and there are billions of biochemical reactions a second going on in the human body that we could never monitor at the conscious level. The key point I want to make is that those systems are in place and designed to automatically make the changes necessary to keep you healthy. The body never wants to be sick. So when I look at people with anxiety and depression, lo and behold, I see there is a lot of systems significantly out of balance. And what they don't realize is that a lot of their anxiety and their depression is really the misunderstanding of the body's messages. So instead of hearing the cells say, I'm tired, go to bed, or stop exercising too much, or get off your butt and do more, they hear whatever they want to hear. I'm tired becomes I need more coffee. I need to get off my butt means after this next show. So what you see is that when I look at these survival systems, the more out of balance they are, the more serious of a condition it is, because it means a person's living with such ignorance of how to take care of themselves that they're getting a lot of symptoms that lead to all sorts of diagnoses. I've had patients on 32 different medical drugs given by 6 doctors, none of which ever talk to each other. And 3 of the combinations, when I looked them up in this drug Chek software, were listed as will kill you. And what was amazing is this one was a criminal lawyer, and I've seen stuff like this day in and day out. My approach is say, let's look at what is your dream? Where do you need to balance? What choices do you need to make with these healthy core values to bring these physiological systems back into balance? And it's extremely rare that when someone's physiological systems normalize, well, we're not asking them to get prepared to run a marathon or anything. I'm just talking about being a normal, healthy person. I can't even count the number of people on one hand that still had anxiety or depression when their physiology was normalized. There are cases where people have things like fungal and parasite infections, and so I may have got them balanced out so that their HAQ scores, their health appraisal questionnaire scores, look quite good, but there's still some kind of a biochemical abnormality or something. So then we dig deeper, but those are lesser. In other words, the people that are balanced on the assessment rarely have anxiety, depression, and when they do, it means there's something that needs to be addressed that's deeper than we can address just through diet and lifestyle factors alone.
Okay, so I'm hearing a few things here, Paul, that fundamentally a lot of changes need to be made, a lot of systems need to be balanced, but we have to have a place of awareness for what that is, and your assessment protocols bring us to that place of awareness. Now, I can say this quite easily, having been through your program. I know that one of the absolute core fundamentals on motivating anyone to change requires them to have a big enough motive. So I think that for our audience to really engage with one of the most important elements of your 1, 2, 3, 4, I want to go a little bit deeper into how you actually apply the one love or the motive or the reason. Because when I know from personal experience, when we've really identified that, created some really affirming values around that, then everything else starts to shift. But like you know, and you've taught me, unless you know why you want to change, then a motive to actually make the changes, which take energy, commitment, time, often they don't get done because we haven't established a big enough motive. So how do you help somebody to establish that motive?
Well, when it comes to establishing the motive, first thing I need to do is find out what interests them. What are you willing to do? Second of all, many people, as you're probably very aware, when you ask them what is it that you'd love to do, they don't know. They're so unused to being able to think about what it is that they really want to do because they've been telling this story to themselves about what they have to do for so long that they aren't really sure. So if I can't find a reasonable dream, goal, or objective that they want to accomplish, then my first thing I want to do is find out, well, what's the biggest nightmare in your life right now? And if it's your anxiety or depression, then getting over anxiety or depression becomes the one love, because that's the one thing in the way of them even returning back to a normal life as they once knew it. So there's many, many things that I can do. I can look into a person's hobbies. I can look into what their desire for enhanced performance at work is, for promotion. With women, oftentimes they want to have children or be able to play with their children or be better mothers. Basically, I just ask a person, what is it that you want to do more than what you're doing right now, running from doctor to doctor? And even I don't have to have like the overarching life dream. I just have to have something that they're motivated enough to do, that they're willing to change for. And if I can't find that fairly efficiently, then we typically agree that the best dream right now is to get rid of the anxiety and depression. And for many, that's a suitable goal, because I'm sure you know that anxiety and depression challenges can be very, very disruptive in relationships.
And so when you're doing that, Paul, also, I know that we talk a lot about when somebody is in that state of depression, anxiety, as you've just said, quite often they can't summons a more affirming goal or dream. So focusing on overcoming that depression or anxiety is almost as if we're acknowledging that that's the nightmare. So we're letting people know that really, if you don't have a dream, then you sure as hell have a nightmare. So let's start there. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. And then, one of the things I wanted to point out, that from my experience, depression is really quite commonly linked to issues of the past. Depressive patients in general, as a rule of thumb, of course there's exceptions to the rule, but I haven't seen many, are depressed because to them the past equals the future. So if they're in a marriage that they don't really want to be in anymore, but they're burying that inside of themselves for whatever reason, or they're in a job they think they've got to do because they won't be able to make enough money somewhere else, or whatever their excuse is, they get to the point where tomorrow is going to be like yesterday. And so they're already projecting their angst into tomorrow. So before tomorrow ever gets there, it's already painted with yesterday. So, the old saying is, it's like driving with your eyes in the rearview mirror. It's dangerous to do because you're looking at what's behind you, not at what's ahead of you. Anxiety people are, interestingly, the opposite polarity. They're anxious about what's going to happen tomorrow, or what's going to happen in the next meeting, or when I walk through that door to talk to my boss or my school teacher, or when my husband finds out I'm still sneaking drinks, or whatever it might be. So I think it's important that when we look at the mindset that's attached to both depression and anxiety, as a therapist, it helps us identify where we need to look at belief systems, behaviors, and programmed habits of thinking. But the summary would be, depressive patients are almost always dealing with someone who's had one or more events in the past that they're having a hard time letting go of. There's often guilt, shame, anger, resent, and those get projected into the future. And the earlier it happens in a person's life, the more likely it is to bring on depression, because they've lived that cycle of, the clouds are everywhere thinking for a long time. If it's a person with anxiety, then we have to find out, well, what is it that's making you anxious? And it could be performance anxiety. It could be social expectations, a long list. But as a therapist, it shows you where you need to orient your awareness approach to the individual. What do you need to make them aware of? How can you help them put their life into context and look at what their thoughts and beliefs are relative to a thing called reality, which is actually what's happening. We're in a digital world now where people have a tendency to live with almost a fantasy expectation that everything on outside their house should be like they see it on television. In other words, if you see all these hot chicks on television that are skinny, wearing exotic clothes, if you've been watching that long enough, you actually believe that to be successful and to find the man you want, you got to be a hot, skinny chick with expensive clothes. So if you don't fit the role, then you can get very anxious because you're now projecting all sorts of I don't have, I won't have, and I can't haves out into your environment. So those are very, very important issues. And if a person can't deal with it, especially the anxiety, then it turns into a panic attack.
So what I'm hearing you talk about there, Paul, is a part of our holistic lifestyle coaching program that you teach us. And in that, you refer a lot, when we're discovering the core beliefs and the behaviors of an individual, you refer a lot to archetypes and the mythological component that correlates to what you were just describing, the role that we play in life. So how important do you think it is for people to start to understand what their archetype is and start to relate to their beliefs and their choices and their behaviors from more of a archetypal standpoint? Would that be beneficial for that person to start understanding themselves more clearly in that framework?
Yeah, I think it's essential. Myths and archetypes are hand in hand. So the myth is the story that you're acting out. And research by Joseph Campbell, Carl Jung, Levi Strauss, and many others, but those are some of the big names. They've looked at stories or myths, teaching stories, myths or teaching stories passed down by our elders before written language emerged. So you learned how to deal with the challenges of living in a tribe, a society, a world, and how to comprehend the mystery of the universe. Imagine seeing an eclipse and not knowing what was going on, or having an asteroid hit the planet, or any number of, imagine being a native person and having thunder and lightning striking and trees catching on fire right in front of you and people dying when they get hit. These are forces you wouldn't understand. So myths were the stories that were told and developed by the elders and the wise men and the shaman and the medicine men and the chiefs of the tribe to teach people how life works and what these things mean. And they were told in the context of that generation or of that era. In other words, cavemen had myths to explain things from a caveman's perspective, but a caveman's myth wouldn't explain an iPhone. It wouldn't explain a computer. So without jumping ahead, what I would like to say is that whatever a person believes is what happens to them when they die, and what the meaning of life is, and why things happen the way they do in life. Why do people die? Why do people that seem to be evil often become so successful? Your myth is a story that you've acquired either consciously or unconsciously, in our culture mostly unconsciously, largely from religious programming, to try to explain what's expected of you in your family or tribe, what's expected of you in the world, how to navigate the world, how to maintain a sense of awe for the mystery of life, and what are the events that are happening. What is an eclipse? What is it? Why does the sun come down at different times and go up at different times in different seasons? So if a person doesn't understand their myth, the problem is they're living it out anyhow, and it often relates to big problems. The archetype, so if we say that the myths relate to the stories and we're all in a story, then the archetypes are the actors in the story. Every story has to have actors, just like every game has to have players. So research into archetypes shows that there are very classical roles. So an archetype, the term archetype means, one of the definitions of an archetype is an empty form. So if you think of a gingerbread man, I'm sure you've made gingerbread cookies, right? Yep. Well, if you just take a gingerbread cutter and shape it into an athlete, that would be the athlete archetype. So within all athletes, they all fall under the athlete archetype, but there's a myriad of expressions of the athlete within the athlete archetype. Just like there's fat mothers, skinny mothers, healthy mothers, unhealthy mothers, loving mothers, abusive mothers, etc. They're all acting out the mother archetype. So when you understand your myth, you understand the story that you're acting out. When you understand the archetype, you understand the role. It's not likely that you're going to see somebody who's in the warrior archetype working in a butcher shop. They're going to be in the military or, doing something that has to do with warring. Just like you're not likely to see a woman whose chief archetype is mothering in a kickboxing ring trying to make money that way, because archetypes are what you're drawn to do. It pulls you. It's not like saying, what do I want to do today? Something triggers you inside, and all of a sudden you find yourself just hungry to read books and magazines and watch movies and think all about this, and all of a sudden you're being pulled into it. So it's almost as though the universe draws each of the characters into its play, whether they realize it or not. And if you don't follow the pull of the archetype, you can have anxiety, because something inside you says, I'm not supposed to be here stocking shelves at the grocery store. I'm supposed to be getting ready for the championships in pole vaulting or swimming or whatever that archetypal pull is. So when I work with people, that have anxiety and depression, the first thing I find, and I've never found a single case that didn't have this, is that they don't realize they're living out a myth that A, they don't agree with, B, they don't enjoy, C, 99% of them never created that myth. That myth came from parental programming and almost always through religious circles. And even being an atheist is a myth. And it doesn't matter even if you're an atheist, because if you live in England or the United States or anywhere in the Western world, you're actually living in a Christian culture and a Christian society with Jewish and Muslim overtones, all of which are Abrahamic religions, all of which basically have the same sort of mythological foundations, and all of which have a cast of archetypes, including warriors and everything else. So when a person lives out a myth that does not serve their heart's desires or their soul's call, if you will, it creates depression. And if they get, usually it starts with anxiety. Anxiety is usually the first thing. They sense that they're in the wrong job, or that they're in the wrong church, or they're in the wrong relationship, for example. And if they can't resolve that because the fear of too much pain in, what will my mom and dad say if I tell them I don't really enjoy Christianity, I want to be a Buddhist. It could be more painful than the cancer they've created trying to deal with it. So really commonly, when I look into a person's myth, I find out that what's happening is, without realizing that, they're creating what is sometimes referred to as a counter myth. A counter myth is what's happening to you because you're living the myth. So an analogy I use in one of my programs is that if somebody's got gluten intolerance and their father's a medical doctor, and they read about it and they go back and say to their dad, I think I know why I've got all this colitis and painful bowel movements and all this trouble I've been having, it's because I'm gluten intolerant. And the father would immediately say, that is a bunch of garbage. He might even say that's a myth. Gluten intolerance is a myth, using myth in the incorrect sense of the word from a professional perspective. There's no such thing as gluten intolerance. So lo and behold, the girl takes it upon herself to start taking gluten out of her diet. And what does she find out? Her pain goes away and she doesn't need the drugs anymore. So what you see is that by living the myth of her father, which would be a standard kind of medical Western myth, she had a counter myth. I've got digestive pain, and no matter how many pills my dad or any of his doctor friends give me, I'm getting worse. So the key point I'm making here is that Mother Nature is very friendly to us because she gives us lots of indicators when we're living a myth that is not true relative to the environment that we're in. Reality is what's happening right now. Myths are supposed to support you for dealing with reality, but when your myth does not support you to deal with reality, then you deal in unreality, and you end up becoming not a healthy person, but an unhealthy person. And knowing the archetype is very, very important, because once I know your archetype, I can help you define polarities. So what is too much or too little? An example I give is, because everybody can relate to it, is being a mother. So I use my system. What is your love? Your love's usually going to be your chief archetype, right? Somebody might be a secretary or a store clerk or even own a business. But often that's not what they love to do. That's what they've been conditioned to believe that they've got to do to make a living, or what their parents wanted them to do. But they may be, for example, they may love music and they can't wait to get off work to go practice playing for their weekend concerts that they do. But if they come to me and they have depression, it's usually because they don't want to be running that business anymore, and they've convinced themselves that they can't make enough money playing music. So their counter myth emerges. So then I say, well, let's make a strategy to move you into doing what you're, excuse me, I drank some kombucha and it's bubbling up. So let's make a strategy to move you out of this place of believing that you can't do this and figure out what is it. Do we need lessons? In other words, we make a strategy, but I look at what are the things that they're doing in those four doctors, diet, quiet, movement, and happiness, that are out of balance with healthy living. And the funny thing is, Joe, I know you know this, when you ask people, are you exercising enough? No. Are you eating well? No. Are you getting to bed on time? No. In other words, 98% of my clients already know what they're doing wrong. So then why aren't they doing it? Because they think that they're stuck. So once I take the mother, let's say, I say, okay, we're going to look at what I call archetypal polarities. We're going to look at love. How do you use your love? Happiness, quiet, diet, and movement. So I say, if you're a mother, what would it look like if you were excessively loving your child, which would be a positive polarity? Well, every mother knows, it's called smothering my child with love. Does it make a healthy kid? No. What would it look like on the negative end of the archetype? So with the mother's use of love, what would the negative? She said, would it be not paying attention to my child at all or abandoning it? There you go. So smothering your child with love on one end and ignoring your child shows you the edge of the road of the mother archetype. If you cross those lines, whether you think you're a mother or not, you're not acting out the mother archetype. You're not fulfilling your role as a mother, which not only leads to problems for the mother, but for the child, for the whole family. So then I say, okay, if you're, without going through them all, I say, let's take diet. I say, okay, if you were to take the habits that you have right now to an extreme, whether it be drinking coffee, eating gluten, eating pastries, eating boxed cereals, not drinking water, if you were taking that to the extreme, what would happen? Well, I'd have more depression, more anxiety, and I might get a disease. And if you were to ignore eating altogether, what would that look like? Well, I'd probably get sick there too. So what I do is I take them through Dr. Diet, Dr. Quiet, Dr. Movement, and Dr. Happiness. I use the experiences that they're already having. That's what brought them to me. And we say, and they can easily see almost all of them are living at some extreme of either ignoring themselves or being, shall we say, overly aggressive with. In other words, instead of drinking water, drinking alcohol, coffee, and soda pop. Once I've got those polarities, then I define for them what's called the middle path. And I say, okay, love your child enough that you can really stay connected to the child, but don't love your child so much that you don't have time to love yourself, or you're going to start making excuses that you don't have time to eat. And then look what happens down here with Dr. Diet. So once a person sees the polarities and now their behaviors are brought up into consciousness and held in contrast with what their dream is in that archetype, it's like someone just cleans the windows and they wake up all of a sudden. Now they have a navigation system. Now they have like a GPS system that they can follow. And I'm telling you, I've had people that have been depressed for 20 years walk out of my office after one day of coaching and not be depressed again.
Yeah.
Because they were just like a leaf blowing in the wind. No one ever taught them how to live. No one ever explained their story. And no one helped them realize they were living out mom and dad's and grandma's and grandpa's religious mythology, which, as I indicated to you in some of my notes, it doesn't work. If you want a few quick examples, imagine being raised in a Christian family where you're taught to believe that you should stay with the person that you get married to for the rest of your life till death do you part. Yet all of a sudden you find yourself falling in love with a coworker, or you get a divorce and you feel terribly guilty, you're ashamed, you don't want your family to know, you don't want all the people that flew all the way across the country to your wedding 2 years ago to know. So there's already a lot of guilt being formed. Why? Because you believe that was a bad thing to do from the beginning. There's your myth. The archetype is the wife in this case. So then you find, paradoxically, we've got a largely Christian or Abrahamic religiously driven society and culture, yet the average person only lasts 2.5 years in a marriage today, and the average person has 3 marriages in a lifetime. So if you don't address the myth, can you see how each time that happens, your guilt and your shame and your sense of disrespect for yourself and your projections as to what you think others are thinking of you, they're weighing you down so heavily, all the antidepressants and all the anti-anxiety drugs in the world will not change that story. Those drugs are just medicating a dysfunctional story.
Paul, I was hoping that you would bring up various examples like that for our audience to, either relate to or at least use as an example to understand. And,
Yeah.
I actually purposely pulled off a couple of notes from an old case study of a client that I worked with. And I know we don't have too much time left, but I just wanted to, ask you to comment on this because I think it's a really great example of the myth that this particular client was buying into, and the fact that the myth really wasn't serving a life-affirming purpose for her.
Right.
She was depressed. She fluctuated between depression and anxiety. She had a lot of issues going on at a physical level, parasites, adrenal fatigue, fungal overgrowth, etc. And she said she really wanted to engage in my program, felt that there were a lot of components there that would benefit her, but she had a number of reservations based on the language I would use. And
Right.
I was using language such as, it's a process of learning to trust yourself, to trust the feedback of your body. And as I started to listen to her, in actual fact, she wrote me an email in response to the outline of my program. And one of the things that she said, and I just wanted to share this because I think it's a really good example of a myth or an archetype that you misinterpret. So she's obviously quite religious in her upbringing, and her response to me was, I really want to benefit from your program, but my belief system is that God commands that I put trust in him and not rely on myself, and also that I must be careful not to follow or put my trust in spirits that are not him. And then she went on to say, if I can do this work from a Christian spiritual perspective, then yes, I am committed. But I get a nauseating feeling, and the brakes get put on when I hear things like trust in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of the last comments she makes is, my God says that I am to love him first and have no other objects that I worship, trust or follow. And so immediately a whole number of red flags went up for me, because as we know that in the path of taking health back and creating health, we have to first of all take accountability, we have to take responsibility. And the first thing I was seeing within this archetype that she was playing out is that there was, based on the belief and the myth that she was holding, there was no way she was ever going to trust herself, take accountability or take responsibility. So right there,
Yes.
she's stabbing herself in the foot in ever taking a role towards not having depression and anxiety.
Well, churches are filled with people every Sunday begging God to take away their cancer, to take away their disease, to take away their back pain, to put a flat screen television in their bedroom. But the key point that I would make, I could dissect all of those statements in great detail and show you that you are dealing with a very, very confused human being, which is very common. She's by no means uncommon. This is not a rare case. This is like every day in my clinical practice. And so just to cut to the chase, though, if she had said that to me or written that to me, I would ask her, how is that working for you? What has living that story and believing and worshiping in that God, which, by the way, is not even a Christian God. That's a complete misunderstanding of Christianity, which is another highly profitable venture, as you can imagine. But I would simply say, well, let's look at the counter myth or counter story. You're living that story out, but you're coming to me with the following 10 health problems. You've been seeing doctors for years, none of it's working. So really, this is a beautiful day for a person like that, because if you have enough knowledge of their own religion, you'll find that there's a lot of beautiful truths in any one of those religions, and it's usually not the religion that has the problem. It's the misinterpretation by pastors and preachers who are taking, shall we say, literary license to put their own spin on things. And what we didn't get out of that, though, is really what her archetype is. So we know the story she's enacting. We'll call it the Christianity story. But what I would say to you, Joe, is what is it that she wanted to get healthy for? What inspired her to even come see you?
Well, that was really interesting. Essentially, it was her son. So for me, it came back to the mother archetype.
Well, there you go. And the mother archetype is a very powerful archetype to work with, because most mothers' genuine interest in being good at mothering is very, very deep. You very rarely meet a mother that's not willing to make changes if you can show her that it'll help her kids live a better life and have a better future. So it's a great place to start. So I would do what I just said to you. I say, okay, love, what has this model taught you? Turn everything over to God. So I would tell her a story that goes like this. There's a farmer named Mr. Smith. His wife died. He finally decided to go buy a farm because that was his wife's dream, was to get out of the city and buy a farm. And so when his wife died, he said he decided to retire and fulfill his wife's dream because he felt that was important. You know, if she was watching, she'd be happy and that he was doing this. So he bought this farm, which was a rundown farm, you know, a fixer-upper farm, and he spent a year fixing it up. And finally, on a year later, when he was doing his last major chore before his farm was all healthy and clean, he was cleaning out the drainage ditch in front of his property. His next-door neighbor, who was a good Christian woman, walked by and met him for the first time. And she comes up, she says, "Oh, hello, I'm your next-door neighbor. I'm Mrs. Johnson." He says, "Hi, I'm Mr. Smith." She says, "Boy, the Lord has been so good to you. Look at this beautiful farm you've been given." And he smiled at her. He said, "Well, Mrs. Johnson, the Lord has been good to me. But you should have seen the shape this place was in when God was managing it." Okay, so the point of the story is we're all given life. We're all given the farm, our body. But it's up to us to manage it. And one of the big misunderstandings in her comments to you is that she has made God himself into an object. First of all, by labeling God as a man, which a God can't be a man or a woman because a God's beyond categorization. That's why they're a God. And B, God, even in the Christian religion, is considered to be unconditional love. So you can't put a condition on unconditional love. So one of the challenges we face with depressed and anxious people is a lot of their myths were designed by religions to confuse people, because you want the first step of reprogramming a person's mind is to confuse them. Once you get enough stress and confusion, all you got to do is put the carrot in front of their nose and they'll go right where you want them to go. And all you got to do is go to any airport to see that. They put you under stress. They make you go through lots of security checks. They confuse you because they're often telling you you're doing things wrong, but you're following the rules, and then they condition you to follow the path. That's all social programming. It's, I won't go into it, but all this is going on all around us. It's used by major corporations. It's used by television ads. It's so the challenge that you had with that patient is really exactly what I'm talking about. But lo and behold, how do you think a woman like that feels when she finally gets her own myth? I say, well, good, you're living your mom and dad's myth. And the counter myth is it's made you fat, tired, and unhappy. Does that sound like what God would want for you? Of course not. So let's go look at your own teachings and see what God really suggested. And then lo and behold, if you have the knowledge or skill, you can, I've been doing this for years, as you know. I take people's own religions and show them what their clarify where they're confused, and then they fall right back in line, and they choose their archetype, they go do it, and then if drugs still need to be used, at least they're being used as part of a solution, not just a free radical flying around the world spending all their money on drugs they don't need and surgical procedures that aren't treating the symptoms. They aren't treating the cause, they're treating the symptoms. The medical approach largely is like pulling the tops off of a weed, but getting to a person's mythology, their belief system, which often is unconscious, and identifying what their dream is and therefore their archetype, and giving them the tools they need to make the decisions to be the mother they want to be the business person they want to be the lover they want to be. Now they're motivated. And, as you know, I work with people that come from all over the world to see me that have failed all over the place and have had diseases for years and years. And oftentimes within 1 year, I take a very sick person, emotionally broken person, and turn them into a healthy, vital contributor to the world who's totally back in love with life again.
Paul, your words of knowledge and wisdom are, as always, far-reaching, and I have no doubt that those that are ready to hear and listen and receive the words of wisdom that you have spoken, it's going to propel them far beyond their anxiety and hopefully be just what they've needed to hear to lift them out of the darkness and the dark night of the soul and shed some light on where they need to focus and where they need to reapply their energy. I have literally a minute left with you, Paul. If you can literally just summarize your 4 steps for me and tell us where we can get more information from, that would be amazing.
What do I love enough to change for? What's out of balance with regard to diet, quiet or rest, getting enough exercise, and being clear about what makes me happy so I know how to create it? What choices am I willing to make now in order to become that person? The optimal, the suboptimal, or do nothing? And what do I need to do within the category of Dr. Diet, Quiet, Movement, and Happiness to make the changes? And that becomes my value. Should I eat organic food or not? Should I exercise 30 minutes a day or 60 minutes a day? Should I get to bed at 10:30 or keep staying up till 1 o'clock in the morning? So 1 love, 2 forces, 3 choices, 4 doctors. People would be well served to look at some of my common resources. How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, my book, which is available at Chek, CHEK or Amazon.com. ChekInstitute.com, you can get the last 4 doctors you'll ever need, How to Get Healthy Now, which is a multimedia ebook. And You Are What You Eat is a very good audio workbook program that gives them 9 hours of training on what to look for when shopping, how to package food, how to read labels, all the things that are often causing anxiety and depression due to chemical manipulation of foods and toxins from containers and things like that. That is not in my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. And then, of course, HLC1, which, as you know, you teach it for me, is really the course where you come to put the 4 doctors together and the Eat, Move, and Be Healthy book with the guidance of a legitimate master that will walk you through the practice for 3 days. So when you leave, you feel like you really got your handle on the ropes and you know how to do it on your own and you feel good about it and it's not just theory anymore. So those are the tools that I would recommend for people to get them started. And you never know, Joe, they might end up in a class with you.
Well, that's the intention. It's to offer the opportunity and to send out the invitation. And for those that are ready, they will see the the right time. So, Paul, I want to thank you so much for your time, and I would love you just to leave us with one affirmation, and that is, whatever your I am is for today, here, and the now. What is your I am?
I am the love that exists right now, and therefore I have every reason to express it.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Paul,
Thank you.
lovely as always. Love time with you. Love to hear all that you always share. And
Thanks.
I hope we can do it again really soon.
I'm sure we can.
You take very good care, my love, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, I'll look forward to seeing your program as soon as it's out.
All right, take care.